Hello students, welcome back to your science class. Today we are looking at chapter 4.2, classification. Right, before we hit there, this is the word today. So we are learning to classify organisms as plants and animals. And secondly, we are learning to classify plants and animals into smaller groups. So before we head into chapter 4.2, we are going to look at some recap. So in our previous chapter, we were talking about species. So every organism has their own set of features or characteristics. So variation in these characteristics help us to recognize different organisms, right? With different sets of features or characteristics help us tell whether is this a tiger or whether is it a lion. So again, a species is the basic unit of classification. It is actually a group of organisms that can exchange genetic information and produce fertile offspring. So the word fertile, it means healthy, okay? So and their offspring can also produce offspring. Whereas a hybrid refers to the offspring produced by the reproduction between two different species. That means two different species made together. So a hybrid cannot produce their own baby, right? For example, a liger is a crossbreed between a male lion and a female tiger. And a male is the offspring of a male donkey and a female horse. And on the previous chapter, we have talked about reasons of extinction, right? So these are several reasons that we have touched on the previous chapter. So the cause of extinction would be loss of habitat, pollution, changes in physical factors such as climate change, killing by people such as poaching, killing by animals such as introduction of a new predator into the food chain. It could also due to a disease outbreak, and lastly, competition of resources with other organisms. And we also talk about what is a biodiversity hotspot. So in order to qualify as a biodiversity hotspot, an area must meet two strict criteria. First criteria is it must contain at least 1,500 species of vascular plants, or more than 0.5% of the world's total, found nowhere else on Earth. Sometimes we call them as endemic species. And second criteria that they must fulfill is it must have lost 70% of its original native habitat. And without further ado, we are heading into classification. So when we talk about classification, what comes across your mind? So it's more about like arranging things into groups, right? Or categorizing things into groups. So imagine you have your table is full of books, various kind of books. You could have like comics, magazines, uh, articles or journals, newspaper, all sorts of reading materials on your master tables. So in order to make it and sorry, and out of all these messy chunks of materials on your messy tables, it would have like uh, reading materials on different topics. It could be on science subjects, it could be topics on English literature, it could be topics on mathematics, geography, chemistry, arts, photography. So we have various reading materials on these messy tables. So in order for us, how to say, in order for this messy table to actually look much more appealing, much more organized, I would say the word organized. So we classify things. For example, you will actually arrange all the mathematic books on one side, all the science books together, and all the English books together, or you could even classify things, or you could also arrange things by, for example, I'll put all the newspaper, stack up all the newspaper together on my table, and I can stack up all the magazines together in one group, and all the comics or the manga together under one category. So likewise, in our world, living organisms, there are thousands, millions types of species around the world. So scientists would actually have to put these living organisms into groups. So why do they put them into groups? So when we put them into groups, it actually helps us to study these organisms much easily. All right. So here, scientists classify organisms based on the variation of a species' characteristics and structures. All right. So for example, we have animals and plants. So animals and plants, they're different. They have their own set of or their own features or their own variation of their characteristics and their structures. So in the 18th century, there was this brilliant scientist by the name of Carl Linnaeus. He developed a system. It is called the linear system of classification. So he developed this system in order to classify living things, right? So how did he classify living things? So as I've mentioned, there are million types of living species around the world, billion species. So Carl Linnaeus, he came out with this system. So when he classified these living things, the first classification that he used was actually called the five kingdoms, right? So kingdom is actually the biggest of the groups that scientists use to classify organisms. So there are actually five kingdoms of living organisms, but in this chapter you would only learn on the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, right? So you need to know that there are five kingdoms of living things. First kingdom is called the animal kingdom. The second kingdom is called the plant kingdom. The third kingdom is called the fungi kingdom. Right? I believe you know what is a fungi. And we have also the Protoctista kingdom, right? And we also have the Prokaryote kingdom. So Prokaryote kingdom is sometimes you also call them uh, the bacteria kingdom. Right. So Carl Linnaeus, he actually not just classified living things into the five kingdoms. He actually it after the kingdom, it is also divided into various subgroups and at various levels. So as here you can see, they have a flowchart that shows the hierarchy of classification. So imagine the closest example I would give you is imagine school. All right, school. Imagine a school is groups of living organisms. So when we first divide them, we would divide them. Let's say we would divide them into primary school and secondary school. So we have two kingdoms: the primary kingdom and secondary kingdom. All right, this is just example. So and afterwards, we could even further divide primary school and secondary school. Let's say we could call for primary section, we could even further divide into lower primary section, uh, upper primary section, and when it comes to secondary school, we could also further uh, divide into various subgroups, such as the lower secondary section, the upper secondary section. So likewise, the Carl Linnaeus likewise, Carl Linnaeus also divide living organisms according to this way. So it first started off with a kingdom, and then uh, it's divided into subgroups at various levels into a phylum, class, an order, a family, a genus, species. So you're not going to learn this in year 7 yet, but in biology class, you will actually learn what are phylum, what are class, what are order. All right. So here is the example of a linear system of classification. Right. Again, remember it started off with a kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and lastly, the smallest of the classification is called species. So again, I would like to emphasize we are only learning on the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. So the animal kingdom refers to a kingdom that contains organisms that are made of more than one cell and are able to move their bodies from place to place. Whereas the plant kingdom is a kingdom that contains organisms that are made of more than one cell. And a plant, in order for an organism to fit into the plant kingdom, they must be able to make their own food. Okay. So here is a comparison between the animal and plant kingdom. So a plant kingdom, living things in the plant kingdom, they can make their own food. They have cells, again, all right, remember the plant cells. They have cells with a cell wall made of substance called cellulose. And they are generally not mobile. And whereas for the animal kingdom, they feed on uh, they're actually living things that feed on other organisms. They are actually cells that do they actually sorry not actually cells. Their cells do not contain cell walls. And of course, we know that animals they are actually very mobile, right? And then of course, between plant kingdom and animal kingdom, they have similarities. Both of them are multicellular organisms, and both of them contains, sorry, their cells contain nucleus, right? So, animal kingdom, right? So now we're going to touch on the animal kingdom first. The animal kingdom can also be further split into two groups, right? First of all, vertebrates, and the second group we call them invertebrates, right? What are vertebrates? So vertebrates refers to animals, okay, with a skeleton inside it, including a backbone. All right. Sometimes we call these uh, endoskeletons, right? Sometimes we call them endoskeletons. And invertebrates refers to animals without a skeleton inside it, or uh, sorry, it's not or, and without a backbone. All right. So again, these are the few keywords. Vertebrates are animals with a skeleton inside it, including a backbone, while invertebrates are animals without a skeleton inside it and without a backbone. Right here in this slide here, you could see pictures of vertebrates and invertebrates, right? Vertebrates. So invertebrates, we are going to touch a little bit more on vertebrates and invertebrates in a short while. Let's see. So I want you in your notes, I want you to actually make your notes this way in table form. So there, as I've mentioned, invertebrates, we're going to go into invertebrates. Sorry, we're going to go into vertebrates first. So for vertebrates, as I've mentioned, they are actually considered animal with a skeleton inside it. so including a backbone. So vertebrates are further classified into 5 different groups, which we call them mammals, reptiles, fish, amphibians, and birds. So in each of these 5 groups, they have their own sets of features or their own sets of characteristics that actually classify them uh, not classify, to justify whether are they mammals, are they reptiles, are they fish, are they amphibians, are they birds. So again, a reminder, I want you to make your notes in table form, right? So this is in order for you to study much easily. First of all, we're going to look into mammals. What are the features that a mammal has? So a mammal they actually have lungs, and they have hair, they have fur, right? So in these pictures here, we can see these are a few examples of mammals. And the second features of mammal is they give birth to live offspring. So what does it mean? It means that they do not lay eggs. Give birth to live offspring, for example, a dog does not lay eggs. A puppy does not hatch from an eggs. So when they give birth to live offspring. So you see a baby puppy that is able to cry, that is able to breathe when 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 it first entered into our world. And of course, a mammal has they are endothermic, or sometimes we call them warm-blooded animals. Means what does warm-blooded means? It means that they can maintain their body temperature regardless of are the temperatures outside. For example, in a cold weather, they would still be able to maintain the temperature, that their body temperature would not change according again their body temperature will not change according to their surrounding temperature. And the second group of vertebrates are called reptiles. So reptiles, they have lungs and they have dry scales and they lay leathery eggs, right? So example of reptiles we have here, we have crocodile, we have iguana, we have snakes. So we have lizards. So another feature of a reptile is they are ectothermic, or sometimes we call them cold-blooded animals. It means their body temperature would changes according to the temperature of the environment. So imagine if the environment is cold, their body temperature would actually drop to match the temperature of the surrounding. So the third group of vertebrates, we call them fish. Sometimes we call them bony fish. So a feature of a fish is they have slimy scales. Sorry, they have slimy scales, and they breathe through their gills. Right? See, every fish they have gills, right? Including shark. Shark is considered a fish. Okay. So and they lay jelly-coated eggs in water. They are ectothermic, or sometimes we call them they are cold-blooded animals. Right, the fourth group of vertebrates are called amphibians. So amphibians, they have thin and moist skin. They breathe through the lungs, but at the same time, they can also absorb oxygen through their moist skin. So we have a few examples of amphibians like frog, toads, newt, salamander. So amphibians, they lay jelly-coated eggs in water. All right, and lastly, amphibians, they are ectothermic or cold-blooded. All right, cold-blooded animals. And the last group of vertebrates, they are considered birds. So what are the features of a bird? So a bird, they would have lungs, they will have feathers, they have beak, right? So you look here, they have feathers, they have beak, and they lay hard-shelled eggs, right? they are considered endothermic or warm-blooded animals. Right? Again, reminder. So only mammals and birds, they are considered warm-blooded animals. Whereas reptiles, fish, and amphibians, they are considered as cold-blooded animals. Alright, so I'm going to stop here. Vertebrates, I'll be recording a separate session for the second part of this chapter. Alright, so I'm signing out right now. See you on the next section.